The thunderstorm that ravaged Wildwood Creek hadn't dampened the spirits inside Holloway's saloon, where Tabitha Nichols stood alone against the wall, her lavender dress a stark contrast to the rough-hewn surroundings of Montana Territory's most notorious watering hole. The year was 1879, and at 22, Tabitha had already resigned herself to a life of perpetual wallflowerhood, having watched for 3 consecutive Saturday nights as every eligible woman in town found a partner while she remained unnoticed. "You might as well go home, Tabitha," she whispered to herself, fingering the small scar that ran from her left cheekbone to her jaw, a permanent reminder of the wagon accident that had claimed her parents 5 years ago. Not even the drunkest cowpoke in this establishment would risk his reputation dancing with damaged goods. She smoothed her hands down the sides of her dress, a garment she'd sewn herself with fabric ordered all the way from Denver. It had cost 3 months of wages from her job at the general store, but Tabitha had convinced herself that perhaps with a pretty enough dress, someone might finally see beyond her scarred face. Now, as the fiddle player struck up another lively tune, she felt foolish for having entertained such a hopeful notion. The dance floor quickly filled with couples, boots stomping on wooden planks, the air thick with laughter, tobacco smoke, and the sweet sour smell of whiskey. Tabitha clutched her small beaded purse tighter, preparing to slip out unnoticed when the doors to the saloon swung open. The man who stepped inside seemed to bring the wild outdoors with him, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar. Raindrops glistened on his duster coat, and his presence caused a momentary lull in conversation. Tabitha recognized him immediately as Ethan Northcott, the new ranch hand at the Murphy spread who had arrived in town just last week. Women throughout Wildwood Creek had been whispering about the handsome stranger since his arrival. Ethan removed his hat, revealing eyes as blue as a summer sky, and scanned the room with the cautious assessment of a man who'd seen his share of trouble. His gaze finally landed on Tabitha, and to her astonishment, he didn't quickly look away as most men did. Instead, he nodded in acknowledgement before making his way to the bar. "Whiskey," he told the bartender, his voice carrying even over the music. "And whatever that lady in the purple dress is drinking." Tabitha's eyes widened as heads turned in her direction. She felt her cheeks flush hot with embarrassment. Was he mocking her? It wouldn't be the first time a stranger had singled her out for cruel amusement. The bartender placed a glass of sherry before her. "Compliments of the gentleman," he said with a puzzled expression that mirrored her own bewilderment. Before Tabitha could decide whether to accept the drink or flee the premises, Ethan Northcott was standing before her, hat in hand, looking for all the world like he had something important to say. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," he said. Ethan Northcott, new to these parts. "Tabitha Nichols," she replied, instinctively turning her scarred side away from him. "And yes, I know who you are. Wildwood Creek isn't large enough for strangers to remain anonymous for long." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Is that right?" "And what else have you heard about me, Miss Nichols?" "Only that you're working for the Murphys and that you're handy with horses." He nodded, seemingly pleased with this assessment. "I've been breaking horses since I was 14, started in Texas, moved up through Colorado, and now here." His eyes held hers steadily. "May I ask why a beautiful woman like yourself is standing alone when there's dancing to be done?" Tabitha nearly choked on her sherry. Beautiful. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had used that word to describe her. "Mr. Northcott, if you're trying to be funny, I assure you, Miss Nichols, humor isn't my aim tonight." He extended his hand toward her. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" She hesitated, certain this must be some sort of wager or dare. "There are plenty of other ladies who would be delighted to dance with you, Mr. Northcott. Ladies without." She trailed off, her fingers unconsciously brushing against her scar. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, not pity, which she would have despised, but a kind of understanding that caught her off guard. "I didn't ask those ladies," he said simply. "I'm asking you." Before Tabitha could formulate a response, Sheriff Wilson's booming voice cut through the music. "Northcott, a word." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Sheriff," he acknowledged without turning. I'm in the middle of something, the burly lawman approached, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered Colt. Just heard from the telegraph office. Seems there's a wanted man matching your description who left a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts across 3 territories. A ripple of excitement moved through the saloon as conversations halted and all eyes turned to the confrontation. Tabitha felt her heart sink. Of course. The first man to show her attention in years, and he was likely a swindler or worse. Ethan still hadn't released her hand. You've got the wrong man, Sheriff. We'll see about that. The sheriff nodded to his deputy. Check his left forearm. The wire says our man has a distinctive scar there, shaped like a horseshoe. Ethan sighed, then carefully rolled up his sleeve to reveal an unmarked forearm. Satisfied, the sheriff frowned, clearly disappointed at being deprived of an arrest. The other arm, too. With deliberate patience, Ethan revealed his right arm as well, also unmarked. Now, if you don't mind, I believe this dance was spoken for. He turned back to Tabitha, whose confusion had now given way to curiosity. As the sheriff retreated, muttering apologies, Ethan's expression softened. Welcome to my life, Miss Nichols. Seems I've got one of those faces people don't easily forget, usually for the wrong reasons. Something about his words resonated with her deeply. How many times had she felt the sting of being judged by appearances? I know something about that, she admitted quietly. He studied her face for a long moment, his eyes not shying away from her scar. That we have in common, then. He squeezed her hand gently. Now, about that dance, I'm not very practiced, Tabitha warned. Neither am I, Ethan replied with a grin that transformed his face. But I reckon we can figure it out together. As they moved toward the dance floor, Tabitha noticed several people whispering behind their hands. Marjorie Wilkins, the banker's daughter, looked particularly scandalized that Ethan had chosen the scarred shopgirl over her own meticulously coiffed self. Everyone's staring, Tabitha whispered, her courage faltering. Ethan glanced around the room, then back to her with a determined expression. He released her hand momentarily and strode to the band. After exchanging a few words and what appeared to be several coins with the musicians, he returned to Tabitha's side. The fiddle player called out, "Clear the floor, folks." Mr. Northcott has requested a special waltz for the lady in lavender. To Tabitha's astonishment, the other dancers moved aside, leaving the floor empty except for her and Ethan. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain he must hear it. What are you doing? She gasped as he took her hand again. Making sure you get the dance you deserve, he replied, leading her to the center of the floor, without distractions. As the first notes of a slow, melodic waltz filled the air, Ethan placed his hand respectfully at her waist and began to guide her in a gentle rhythm. Just follow my lead, he murmured. You're doing fine. Tabitha could scarcely believe what was happening. Here she was, dancing with the most handsome man in Wildwood Creek, with every eye in the place upon them. But instead of feeling self-conscious about her scar, she found herself lost in Ethan's steadfast gaze, which never once strayed from her face. Why me? She couldn't help asking as they turned across the empty floor. Because when I walked in and saw you standing there, you were the only person in this room who looked like she had a story worth knowing, he answered simply. Something in his sincerity made her brave enough to ask, "And do you make a habit of clearing dance floors for women you've just met?" His laugh was warm and genuine. First time, actually, though I have to say the look on that banker's daughter's face might make it worth repeating. As the music continued, Tabitha gradually relaxed into the dance, allowing herself to enjoy the unexpected moment. When the waltz finally ended, the saloon erupted in applause, whether genuine or merely polite. She couldn't tell, but for once, she didn't care. Ethan bowed slightly, still holding her hand. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Nichols." "Thank you, Mr. Northcott," she replied, a smile spreading across her face despite her best efforts to remain composed. "It was unexpected. The best things usually are," he gestured toward the door. "May I escort you home? It's still raining and I've got an umbrella." Tabitha hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd appreciate that." As they stepped out onto the rain-slicked boardwalk, Ethan unfurled a large black umbrella and held it carefully to shield her from the downpour. The streets of Wildwood Creek were deserted, the stormy night having driven most sensible folks indoors. "I live just past the general store," Tabitha said, pointing down the muddy Main Street. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Ethan spoke again. "How long have you been in Wildwood Creek?" "All my life," she answered. "My parents homesteaded near here when Montana was still just a territory. After they died, I took the job at Hadley's General Store to keep a roof over my head." "I'm sorry about your parents," he said quietly. "Must have been hard being on your own," Tabitha nodded. Is, but I manage." She glanced at him curiously. "What brought you to Wildwood Creek? Most people are trying to leave, not arrive." Ethan's expression grew thoughtful. "I go where the work takes me." "The Murphys needed someone who could handle their new stallion, a real firecracker from what I hear and word gets around about my way with difficult horses." He paused. "But truth be told, I've been thinking it might be time to put down roots somewhere." "And you're considering Wildwood Creek?" Tabitha couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Their little town was hardly prosperous, with the mines playing out and the railroad having bypassed them for more promising locations. "Depends on what I find here worth staying for," he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her look away. They reached the small clapboard house where Tabitha rented a room from the widow Jenkins. A warm light glowed in the front window, and the porch offered shelter from the rain. "This is me," Tabitha said, suddenly reluctant for the evening to end. "Thank you again for the dance, Mr. Northcott." "Ethan, please," he corrected gently. "And it was entirely my pleasure, Miss Nichols." "Tabitha," she offered in return. He smiled at that. "Tabitha." The way he said her name made it sound like something precious. "I wonder if you might show me around town sometime. Being new, I could use a guide." Yes, I suppose I could do that," she replied, surprised by her own boldness. "Tomorrow, say after church." Tabitha nodded, unable to suppress a smile. After church would be fine. "Good night then, Tabitha." He tipped his hat and waited on the porch until she was safely inside before turning back toward town, his tall figure soon disappearing into the rainy darkness. Once inside her small room, Tabitha leaned against the door, her heart still racing from the events of the evening. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something dangerous and wonderful: hope. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed everything clean. Tabitha took extra care with her appearance, pinning her auburn hair in a style that partially concealed her scar, and choosing her best dress, a forest green creation with modest lace trim at the collar. Throughout the church service, she found herself constantly aware of Ethan's presence several pews behind her. When Reverend Adams spoke of second chances and new beginnings, she couldn't help wondering if the sermon had been written especially for her. After the final hymn, as the congregation filed out into the churchyard, Tabitha felt a flutter of nerves. Would Ethan honor their arrangement, or had last night been nothing more than a momentary kindness toward a lonely woman? Her doubts vanished when she spotted him waiting beneath the old oak tree, freshly shaved and wearing a clean white shirt beneath his Sunday best. When he caught sight of her, his face brightened with a genuine smile. "Miss Nichols," he greeted her, then corrected himself. "Tabitha." "You look lovely today." She felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Thank you, Ethan." Several of the town's residents openly stared at them, clearly surprised by the familiar way they addressed each other. Marjorie Wilkins passed by with her parents, her nose wrinkled in disdain. "I see the local welcoming committee is out in force," Ethan murmured, noting the reactions. Tabitha sighed. "Wildwood Creek is a small town, people talk." "Let them," he said with a shrug. "Now about that tour," she nodded, and they set off down Main Street. Tabitha pointed out the various establishments, the blacksmith's forge, the small schoolhouse where she sometimes helped teach the younger children, and Hadley's General Store where she worked. "And over there," she said, indicating a weathered building with a freshly painted sign, "is Mrs. Larson's bakery. She makes the best apple pies in the territory." "Is that so?" Ethan's eyes lit up. "I have a weakness for apple pie." "Then we should definitely stop there," Tabitha suggested. "My treat to thank you for the dance last night." They entered the bakery, where the sweet aroma of cinnamon and baked goods enveloped them. Mrs. Larson, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, greeted Tabitha warmly before her gaze settled on Ethan. "Well, well," she said, wiping flour from her hands. "This must be the young man who caused such a stir at Halloway's last night. Half the town's talking about your gallant gesture, Mr. Northcott." Ethan looked embarrassed. "Word travels fast." "Like wildfire," Mrs. Larson agreed, "and high time someone showed some appreciation for our Tabitha. Smartest girl in town and kind to a fault." She winked at Tabitha. "What can I get for you two? 2 slices of your famous apple pie, please," Tabitha requested, placing coins on the counter. "Coming right up. You can sit at the little table by the window if you like." They settled into the cozy corner as Mrs. Larson brought over generous slices of pie topped with dollops of fresh cream. "This looks amazing," Ethan said, taking a bite. His eyes widened in appreciation. "And tastes even better. You weren't exaggerating." Tabitha smiled, enjoying his obvious pleasure in the simple treat. "Mrs. Larson was my mother's friend. She's been looking out for me since the accident." Ethan's expression grew serious. "The accident that—" He gestured vaguely toward his own cheek. Tabitha nodded, bracing herself for the usual awkward sympathy. "A wagon accident 5 years ago. We were coming back from Helena when the horses spoiled. The wagon overturned. I was thrown clear mostly except for—" She touched her scar lightly. "My parents weren't so fortunate." To her surprise, Ethan didn't offer platitudes or uncomfortable pity. Instead, he said, "You survived. That takes courage, not just the surviving part, but the living after." His understanding caught her off guard. "Most people just see the scar," she admitted. "They don't consider what it represents." "Most people don't look beyond the surface of anything," he replied. "Their loss." They finished their pie in comfortable conversation, learning about each other's lives. Tabitha discovered that Ethan had grown up on a small ranch in Texas, lost his parents to influenza as a teenager, and had been making his own way ever since, primarily working with horses too wild for others to handle. "There's an art to it," he explained. "Understanding that fear drives most bad behavior. Once you show them there's nothing to fear from you, most horses come around. Is that your philosophy with people too?" Tabitha asked, only half joking. Ethan considered this. "I suppose it is in a way. Though people are considerably more complicated than horses." As they left the bakery, Tabitha noticed Sheriff Wilson approaching with purposeful strides. Her heart sank, fearing another confrontation like the one at the saloon. "Northcott," the sheriff called. "Got a word from the Murphy ranch. That stallion of theirs broke through the corral fence this morning. They're asking if you can head out there straight away." Ethan frowned. "Anyone hurt?" "No, but old man Murphy's fit to be tied. Says that horse is headed for the hills if someone doesn't catch him soon." Ethan turned to Tabitha with regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry to cut our time short." "It's all right," she assured him. "Your work is important." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to come along? It's a beautiful ride out to the Murphy place, and I'd welcome the company." Tabitha blinked in surprise. "Me, but I'd just be in the way." "Not at all," he insisted. "Besides, I'd like you to see what I do." The invitation was unexpected but not unwelcome. "I'd need to change into something more suitable for riding," she said, glancing down at her Sunday dress. "I can have horses ready at the livery in 20 minutes, he offered. Sheriff Wilson looked between them with raised eyebrows but said nothing. "I'll meet you there," Tabitha agreed, her heart racing at the prospect of spending more time with Ethan. 20 minutes later, dressed in her plain work skirt and boots, Tabitha approached the livery stable to find Ethan waiting with 2 saddled horses, a sturdy bay gelding for himself and a gentle-looking mare for her. "Do you ride much?" he asked, helping her mount. "Not since before the accident," she admitted, "but I remember how." Ethan nodded approvingly. "Like most worthwhile things, it comes back to you." He swung himself effortlessly into his own saddle. "It's about 4 miles to the Murphy ranch. We'll take it easy." The ride out of town took them along a winding trail through pine-covered hills. The day was perfect, blue skies stretching endlessly above, the air fresh with the scent of earth and grass after the previous night's rain. Tabitha found her confidence returning as she and the mare settled into a comfortable rhythm. "You're a natural," Ethan commented, watching her with admiration. That mare usually doesn't take to strangers so quickly. Animals don't judge by appearances, Tabitha said. It's one of the things I've always appreciated about them. They crested a hill, and the Murphy Ranch came into view below a substantial spread with a main house, several outbuildings, and extensive pastureland surrounded by split-rail fencing. Several men on horseback could be seen combing the property's edges. They're looking for the stallion, Ethan explained. That's him over there by the tree line. Tabitha followed his pointing finger and spotted a magnificent black horse standing proudly at the edge of the forest, his coat gleaming in the sunlight. Even from this distance, she could see he was exceptionally powerful, alert, and completely untethered to human control. "He's beautiful," she breathed. "And knows it too," Ethan said with a chuckle. "That's Midnight Fury brought in from Kentucky at great expense. Murphy wants to improve his breeding stock, but that horse has other ideas." They continued down toward the ranch, where they were met by a weathered man in his 60s whom Ethan introduced as Harold Murphy. "Thank the Lord you're here, Northcott," the rancher said, not bothering to hide his relief. "That devil horse has already kicked down 2 fence sections and sent my best wrangler to Doc Peterson with a broken arm. He's just testing his boundaries," Ethan replied calmly. "Give me an hour with him and we'll see where we stand." Murphy finally seemed to notice Tabitha. "Miss Nichols, isn't it, from the general store?" "Yes, Mr. Murphy," she confirmed. "I hope you don't mind my accompanying Ethan." The old rancher looked surprised but shrugged. "No skin off my nose so long as that horse gets handled." He turned back to Ethan. "What's your plan?" "First, call off your men," Ethan instructed. "They're just making him more nervous. Then I'll need some oats, a lead rope, and space to work." As Murphy went to relay the instructions, Ethan helped Tabitha dismount. "You can watch from the corral fence if you'd like, but stay back. Even with my experience, that stallion is unpredictable. Be careful," she urged, suddenly concerned for his safety. He smiled reassuringly. "Always am." Tabitha joined Mrs. Murphy, a kind-faced woman who offered her tea while they watched from the safety of the porch. From this vantage point, Tabitha had a clear view as Ethan approached the stallion with measured steps, a small bag of oats in one hand, a rope loosely coiled in the other. "Your young man knows his business," Mrs. Murphy observed. "Most of our hands wouldn't go near that horse without 3 others backing them up." "He's not my," Tabitha began, then stopped herself. What exactly was Ethan to her? After just one dance and an afternoon together, she hardly had the right to claim any connection. And yet, something undeniable had sparked between them. Mrs. Murphy smiled knowingly, but said nothing more as they turned their attention back to Ethan's work. For nearly an hour, he moved in a careful dance with the stallion approaching slowly, retreating when the horse showed signs of anxiety, offering oats, speaking in tones too low for them to hear from the porch. Gradually, the distance between man and horse decreased. "I've never seen anything like it," Mr. Murphy murmured, having joined them on the porch. "That horse hasn't let anyone within 20 feet of him since he arrived." Finally, Ethan stood directly beside the magnificent animal, stroking his neck as the stallion calmly accepted an offering of oats from his palm. "He's got the touch, all right," Murphy said with satisfaction. "Worth every cent I'm paying him." Ethan glanced toward the porch, and even from a distance, Tabitha could see the pride in his smile as he looked directly at her. Something warm bloomed in her chest at the realization that he wanted to share this moment of triumph with her specifically. When Ethan eventually led the stallion into the corral, securing the gate behind them, the ranch hands erupted in appreciative whistles and applause. "That's worth staying for dinner at least," Mrs. Murphy declared. "You'll join us too, won't you, Miss Nichols?" "I wouldn't want to impose," Tabitha demurred. "Nonsense. Any friend of Ethan's is welcome at our table. Besides, it's getting late and you shouldn't ride back to town in the dark." As twilight approached, the Murphy household bustled with activity. The delicious aromas of roast beef, fresh bread, and apple cobbler filled the air as ranch hands and family gathered for the evening meal. Tabitha found herself seated beside Ethan at the long dining table, acutely aware of his presence, the clean scent of soap mixing with leather and horses, the warmth of his arm occasionally brushing hers. "You were amazing with that horse," she told him quietly as platters were passed. "I've never seen anything like it. It's about building trust," Ethan explained. "Midnight Fury has been handled badly somewhere in his past. He's not mean he's protective of himself." Something in his tone made Tabitha wonder if he was still talking about the horse. "And now he trusts you." "We've made a start," Ethan replied. "Trust takes time." After dinner, as dusk deepened into true night, Mr. Murphy insisted they stay. "It's too dark for the ride back now. We've plenty of room. Miss Nichols can take the guest bedroom, and Ethan, you're already set up in the bunkhouse." Though Tabitha protested that she needed to be at work in the morning, Mrs. Murphy was adamant. "Harold will ride into town at first light to let Mr. Hadley know you're here. Your reputation won't suffer for helping a neighbor in need." And so Tabitha found herself in the Murphys' comfortable guest room, wearing a borrowed nightgown and reflecting on the unexpected turn her life had taken in just 24 hours. From wallflower to the center of attention, from lonely shopgirl to the companion of the most intriguing man she'd met in years, sleep eluded her despite the comfortable bed. Eventually, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped out onto the small balcony adjoining her room. The night was clear, with thousands of stars illuminating the vast Montana sky. In the distance, she could make out the silhouette of the bunkhouse where Ethan was presumably sleeping. "Couldn't sleep either," Tabitha started at the voice from below. Looking down, she saw Ethan standing in the yard, looking up at her balcony. "You startled me," she whispered, conscious of the sleeping household. "Sorry about that." In the moonlight, his smile was a flash of white. "Mind if I join you for a spell?" Before she could answer, he was already climbing the sturdy trellis that ran alongside the balcony. With impressive agility, he swung himself over the railing and landed lightly beside her. "That was reckless," she admonished, though she couldn't help but be impressed. "Worth the risk," he countered, his voice soft in the darkness. "It's a beautiful night." They stood side by side, gazing at the star-filled sky. Tabitha was intensely aware of the impropriety of the situation. She in her nightclothes, albeit covered by a shawl, alone with a man she barely knew. Yet somehow it felt right. "Thank you for coming with me today," Ethan said after a comfortable silence. "It meant a lot to share that with you." "I'm glad I came," Tabitha admitted. "I haven't felt this alive in a long time." Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Tabitha, I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped. "What is it?" "I wasn't entirely truthful about why I came to Wildwood Creek," he began. "It's true I was hired to work with Murphy's stallion, but that's not the only reason." Tabitha tensed, preparing herself for disappointment. Was he married? Running from the law, her mind raced with possibilities. "I came because of a letter," Ethan continued, "from my mother's sister, your Aunt Margaret." Tabitha stared at him in confusion. "Aunt Maggie, but she lives in Boston. I haven't seen her since I was a child." "She wrote to me 6 months ago," Ethan explained. "She'd read about my work with horses in a newspaper article and recognized my surname. You see, our families knew each other years ago, back in Texas. Your father and my father were friends before your family moved north." "But that would mean that we almost knew each other as children, yes." Ethan took a deep breath. "Your aunt has been worried about you ever since your parents died. She wrote asking if I would check on you during my travels, maybe let her know how you were faring." Tabitha stepped back, trying to process this revelation. "So our meeting wasn't accidental. The dance, all of this, it was because my aunt asked you to look out for me." Ethan reached for her hand, his expression earnest. "The request brought me to Wildwood Creek, yes. But everything that's happened between us has been real, Tabitha. I saw you in that saloon and was drawn to you before I even realized who you were." "How can I believe that?" she whispered, hurt and confusion warring within her. "Because I could have fulfilled my promise to your aunt with a simple hello and a letter back to Boston," he said. "I didn't need to ask you to dance. I didn't need to clear the floor, and I certainly didn't need to spend today showing you a part of my life I've never shared with anyone else." His sincerity was difficult to doubt, but Tabitha's trust had been shaken. "Why tell me now?" "Because I'm falling for you," Ethan said simply. "And I couldn't let that happen with this secret between us. You deserve the truth, even if it means you'll send me away." The night air seemed to still around them as Tabitha absorbed his words. Falling for her? The very notion seemed impossible, and yet the evidence had been there in every look, every gesture, every moment they'd shared. "I don't know what to say," she finally admitted. "You don't have to say anything tonight," Ethan assured her. "Just know that whatever brought me here, it's you that's making me consider staying." Before she could respond, a light appeared in a downstairs window of the house. "Someone's awake," Tabitha whispered urgently. "You should go." Ethan nodded, moving toward the trellis. "Think about what I've said. We can talk more on the ride back to town tomorrow." After he disappeared into the darkness, Tabitha returned to her bed, her mind reeling. The revelation about her aunt's involvement complicated things, but it didn't change the connection she'd felt with Ethan. If anything, it added a curious layer of destiny to their meeting, as though they had been meant to find each other all along. The morning brought clarity with its golden light. As Tabitha dressed and prepared for the journey back to town, she came to a decision. She would trust her heart, which had been dormant for so long but now beat with renewed purpose. She found Ethan in the stable, saddling their horses. When he saw her, uncertainty flickered across his features. "Good morning," he said cautiously. "Did you sleep well?" "Eventually," she replied. "I had a lot to think about." "Tabitha, about last night," she raised a hand to stop him. "I want you to know that I appreciate your honesty. It couldn't have been easy to tell me the truth, knowing I might react badly." "It wasn't," he acknowledged, "but it was necessary." "Yes, it was." She stepped closer to him, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "And now I need to be honest with you. When you asked me to dance, it was the first time in years that someone really looked at me and saw more than my scar. Whether you came to Wildwood Creek for my sake or not, what's happened between us feels real to me." Relief washed over Ethan's face. "It is real. The most real thing I've felt in a long time." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she remained still, his fingers gently traced the line of her scar, a touch so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "This is part of your story," he said softly. "Not something to hide, but something that shows your strength." Tabitha leaned into his touch, her heart full. "I'm not sure what happens next," she confessed. "This is all very new to me." "For me too," Ethan assured her, "but I'd like to find out if you're willing." As they rode back toward Wildwood Creek, side by side in the morning sunshine, Tabitha felt a sense of possibility she'd thought forever lost to her. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, she looked forward to tomorrow. Over the weeks that followed, Ethan became a fixture in Tabitha's life. He called on her properly, taking her for Sunday walks and occasional dinners at the small restaurant that had opened near the telegraph office. He made no secret of his intentions, courting her openly despite the whispers that still followed them around town. Tabitha bloomed under his attention, gradually rediscovering the confidence she'd lost along with her parents. She began holding her head higher, no longer attempting to hide her scar. If Ethan could see beyond it, perhaps others could too, and if they couldn't, she found she cared less and less. 1 month after their dance at Holloway's saloon, Ethan invited her to the Murphy Ranch again. "They're holding a small gathering," he explained, "to celebrate the successful training of Midnight Fury." "I'd love to come," Tabitha replied, having grown fond of the Murphys during her brief stay. "Wear something you can dance in," Ethan suggested with a mysterious smile. When they arrived at the ranch that Saturday evening, Tabitha was surprised to find not just the Murphy family and their hands, but what appeared to be half the town of Wildwood Creek in attendance. Lanterns hung from trees, casting a warm glow over the yard which had been cleared for dancing. A small band, including the same fiddle player from Holloway's, was setting up near the barn. "What's all this?" Tabitha asked, amazed at the transformation. Ethan squeezed her hand. "A proper dance without the whiskey and smoke of Holloway's. Mrs. Murphy thought you deserved that." "This is all for me?" she asked incredulously. "For us," he corrected. "Though I may have mentioned how much I enjoyed dancing with you that first night." As the music began and couples took to the impromptu dance floor, Tabitha noticed something remarkable. The stares directed their way were no longer judgmental, but curious, even approving. Ethan's steadfast devotion to her had gradually changed perceptions throughout Wildwood Creek. Even Marjorie Wilkins offered a stiff nod of acknowledgement as she passed by on the arm of a young rancher from a neighboring property. "May I have this dance, Miss Nichols?" Ethan asked formally, though his eyes twinkled with private amusement. "You may, Mr. Northcott," she replied, matching his playful tone. As they moved gracefully among the other dancers, Tabitha caught Mrs. Murphy giving her a thumbs up from the refreshment table. She smiled in return, feeling a happiness she'd almost forgotten was possible. Later, as the evening cooled and stars appeared overhead, Ethan led her away from the festivities to a quiet spot beneath an old oak tree. From this vantage point, they could still hear the music but were granted a moment of privacy. "I received a letter from your Aunt Margaret yesterday," Ethan said, taking both her hands in his. "I wrote to her last week to tell her I'd found you well and strong and beautiful," Tabitha asked with a teasing smile. "And beautiful," he confirmed seriously. "The most beautiful woman I've ever known, inside and out." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that gleamed in the moonlight. "I also told her my intentions toward you if you'll have me." Tabitha's breath caught as she recognized a simple gold ring with a small pearl nestled in its center. "It was my mother's," Ethan explained. "She always said it should go to the woman who captured my heart completely." He sank to one knee, still holding her hands. "Tabitha Nichols, I know it hasn't been long, but when something's right, you feel it in your bones. I love you. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy spilled onto Tabitha's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." As Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, a burst of applause erupted from nearby. They turned to find the entire Murphy family and several townspeople watching from a respectful distance, their faces wreathed in smiles. "Were they in on this?" Tabitha asked, laughing through her tears. "The whole town was," Ethan admitted. "Seems word gets around fast in Wildwood Creek." "Like wildfire," she agreed, remembering Mrs. Larson's words from weeks ago. As they rejoined the celebration, now as an engaged couple, Tabitha reflected on how completely her life had changed since that rainy night when she'd stood alone against the wall at Holloway's saloon. All because one man had seen beyond her scar to the woman beneath, had taken her hand and cleared the floor for them alone. 6 months later, on a perfect spring day, Tabitha Nichols became Mrs. Ethan Northcott in Wildwood Creek's small white church. The entire town turned out for the occasion, along with her Aunt Margaret, who had traveled all the way from Boston for the ceremony. "Your parents would be so proud," her aunt told her as they shared a moment before the wedding, "and so grateful to know you've found such happiness." Tabitha, radiant in a cream-colored gown that she'd made herself, couldn't contain her joy. "Did you really think your letter would lead to this?" she asked. Aunt Margaret smiled mysteriously. "I hoped it might." Ethan's reputation with difficult cases preceded him. "I just didn't realize his talents extended beyond horses to healing hearts as well." The church bells rang out across Wildwood Creek as Ethan and Tabitha emerged as husband and wife. He'd purchased a small property just outside of town where they planned to start a horse ranch of their own. Murphy had gifted them with 2 of Midnight Fury's first foals as a wedding present, the beginning of what would become the finest breeding stock in the territory. That evening, at their wedding celebration in the town square, Ethan once again asked the musicians to clear the floor. As they danced alone beneath the stars, surrounded by the community that had become their extended family, Tabitha knew she had found not just a partner but a home. "I love you, Mrs. Northcott," Ethan whispered, holding her close. "And I love you," she replied, no longer afraid to show her face, her whole self to the world. "Thank you for asking me to dance." "Best decision I ever made," he said, sealing his words with a kiss as their friends and neighbors cheered them on, celebrating a love that had begun with one dance and would last a lifetime.